Linda, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear
Okay,
me okay?
perfect. I'm going to go ahead and mute until we get started.
Okay.
Hi, John. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I'm going to go ahead and mute, and we're just about to get started.
Okay, thanks.
Chris, do we have question papers for the audience? No. I have 50 of them, and they are all gone but one, so somebody's got a bunch of them. John Gannon tested positive for COVID. So who's taking the questions?
I don't know how we're collecting them, but Mark will be reading them.
Who's taking the questionnaires?
I am trying to find out. I know Mark will be reading them off. I think he'll be.
Sorry, where did we get those old questions?
They are at the front desk. They might have all been grabbed. I'm not sure.
everybody that's going to be here?
Yes and no. This will be everyone that's in person, and then Linda shielded me on Zoom, as well as John Foote. He'll be on Zoom, and I think John Jenner will be joining on Zoom as well. Yes, there's a little. There you go. Okay, perfect.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. All right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We have the Lincoln Auditorium until 5 o'clock, and we have to be out by 5. So we'll get started. There's a lot of you that have already submitted some panelist questions. I appreciate that. If I think we're out of sheets for the panel questions, you can just write your question on the back of your program or whatever you have there at your seat if you'd like to submit some, and Bruce can bring those up. So with that, good afternoon. Welcome to the historic Lincoln Auditorium here at the State House. I am Mark Johnson, the moderator for today's forum, and just in case there's somebody that is wondering, I'll get this out of the way right now. Retirement is weird and awesome. Really awesome. First time I've shaved this month. First time I've worn my jacket this month as well. I want to welcome all of you here today as we discuss an issue that involves Idaho children. That is not a new issue, as many of you know, but it is an issue that continues to bubble underneath the very floors and surface of this State House. I want to apologize in advance to any of you that thought that this might be something more than what it is. This is not a panel discussion about vaccinations or about COVID. This is a panel discussion on the process and the belief in faith healing. So again, I just wanted to put that out there. This is not about vaccines or about the pandemic that we're currently in. A quick little primer for those of you that don't know the history. Even before statehood, Idaho Territory required all parents, every parent, to, quote, and I quote, furnish necessary food, clothing, shelter, or medical attention to their children, regardless of the parents' religious beliefs or practices. Idaho law also protected the health of Idaho kids for many years, but in 1972, the legislature inserted faith healing provisions into the statute that allowed persons who practice faith healing to refuse to provide food and or medical care to their children without fear of prosecution, even should that child die or suffer harm. Idaho protected and has the statute that protects those parents from prosecution. Since then, records indicate that over 200 Idaho children have died from curable diseases or illnesses because they were denied medical treatment, and experts estimate that 90% of those kids would have lived had they been treated with modern medicine. So we're here today to discuss this issue, which again is not a new one. It has been brought up in this auditorium and in session in previous years in hopes of finding a way to protect all Idaho kids regardless of the beliefs of their family. So, as you can see, we've limited the number of audience participants because of the pandemic. We want to welcome viewers watching on Idaho Public Television stream broadcast And again, we're very, very fortunate to be able to have this room, and extremely fortunate to have a group of local and regional leaders who are very well versed on this topic. A few of them have very close personal and professional experience with this. So let's begin. And let's begin with former Idaho Chief Justice and former Attorney General Jim Jones, who coincidentally is teaching his very first law class. The man has done virtually everything you can do in this state regarding law, including holding the highest justice position. But today he becomes a law professor for the very first time, rookie professor, I might add. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Jones.
Thank you, Mark. Having a little trouble with that microphone. As Mark said, there's been a statute on the books since before statehood that requires parents to give their kids medical care, food, shelter, clothing, and if they don't do it, prior to statehood it was a misdemeanor, but the legislature later made it a felony offense with up to 15 years in prison to fail to carry out that responsibility. There is another statute, it's called Injury to Children, that basically has the same requirement. In 1972, interestingly enough, the heavy hand of the federal government came down on the state of Idaho, and the Fed said, you have to change your statute. Your statute says that anybody who violates the law is subject to severe penalties, but we're going to require you, state of Idaho, to include an exemption for faith healing. That's the only reason it's in the statute is in 1972, the federal government says, either you do it or you're going to lose federal funds. So the state dutifully did it. And here's what they wrote into the statute. The practice of a parent or guardian who chooses for his child treatment by prayer or spiritual means alone shall not for that reason alone be construed to have violated duty of care to the child. So if you denied the child food and said, well, it was because of my faith, then you could starve your kid. If your kid needed medical care and you said, well, it's because of my faith that I didn't provide it, then you might get out of the statute that requires you to go to the pen. It's interesting because we had a case in the Supreme Court, came out of northern Idaho, where the parents on appeal to the court said, well, we actually starved our kids because of our faith. Unfortunately, they did not bring that claim below when they were convicted, so they couldn't use it on appeal. And their attorney couldn't explain what their faith was or why the kids were starved. We've encountered some concerns about some of the people who think that this would have some influence on vaccines or vaccinations. And as Mark said, that's not in the picture. Prior to 1972, there was no instance where anybody can show that people were prosecuted for failing to provide vaccinations or preventive care. The statute, as it's drafted, applies to what we would call diagnostic care. That is, if the child had a broken leg or if there was some problem that encountered during the birthing process, Those are the kinds of things. Existing illnesses or injuries are what the parents are required to provide medical care to take care of. It doesn't have anything to do with preventive care, that is taking pills or something or vaccinations to prevent some kind of occurrence or some kind of an illness to happen. So, I mean, that's just not in the picture. There's a provision of the Idaho Constitution that does have a direct effect on this, and it says that you cannot give religious preference to any religious organization. It is my opinion that the faith healing exemption is in violation of Article 1, Section 4 of the Idaho Constitution. And in the event that I've got an organization called the Committee to Protect and Preserve the Idaho Constitution. It was one of the organizations that successfully overturned the legislature's law that was trying to limit the use of the initiative and referendum. We were able to get that law declared unconstitutional in our legal action. I've looked at doing the same for the faith healing exemptions, and we may well do that, take it to court, but it would be so much easier if public policy was directed by the legislature and they just repealed the faith healing exemption. It's had resulted in the deaths of many children. People did not provide medical care. The children died. And it's interesting, we have about half dozen or so laws on the books that says that you cannot kill a fetus in the womb. But once the child is born, that child's on its own here in Idaho, and it shouldn't be that way.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate your time. It's obvious that this issue means a lot to you, so thank you for being part of this today. We're also very fortunate to have with us former First Lady here in Idaho, Patricia Kempthorne, who founded a local family nonprofit. And as I mentioned to her, and she agreed with me before today's discussion began, this topic hits the center of her nonprofit's missions bullseye. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia Kempthorne.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all. Oh, there we go. Okay. Good afternoon. Thanks, Mark. And thank you all for being here today. I'm very honored to be able to join this panel on this much-needed dialogue about the well-being of children in Idaho. But when I was first asked to join this discussion, I have to admit I didn't really know what it was. I didn't really know much about it. I think the Justice has done a wonderful job of explaining the concerns and the caring to come at it from that perspective, somebody who has dedicated so much time to the families of our state. I really wanted to be a part, and I really hope just to share with you from a child advocate perspective and a family advocate perspective that if we have a statute that indeed does not protect the children of the state but makes them more vulnerable, then that just doesn't seem right to me. I've dedicated my work life and my life's work to promoting and maintaining a sense of family consciousness at home, in the workplace, and in the community. I truly believe family is the core of our society, and without that strong bond, it is much more difficult for children to develop, learn, and grow, and really realize their full potential. I believe and work daily to promote the optimal early development and learning and health of children by supporting and engaging the parents and the caregivers. If you check, you will find that I've almost literally, as Mark pointed out, quoted the mission statement to my foundation and to an organization that I have volunteered for nearly 2 decades, which is completely dedicated to strengthening families and communities across the country. And I can't say it any better. It is hard to build communities where families and children can thrive and grow. Those communities can include churches and schools and neighborhoods. but I have also happily bragged for several decades that Idaho is the best place to raise a family. We hold ourselves to high ethical and moral standards. In doing so, we may need to look now and then and see where we might improve the lives of our children and continue to strengthen families. The reality is, and this is, I want to share with you just a paraphrase blog post from the Children's Trust Fund, which says, parenting can be really hard. None of us has all the answers. We all need that community of support to raise our children. Somewhere in that community of support, if we're brave enough to ask, we will find the help that we need. As thought leaders and decision makers, all of us in this room need to be aware of policies or practices that can endanger the mental and physical health of our citizens, most particularly our children. We must have the integrity to address those issues in the transparent dialogue and look at each other for support and understanding. Excuse me. I just lost my place. Isn't that good? We live in community. We are each a part of the fabric of that community and are each stronger because we bring strengths together to allow our state to thrive. As a society, we have determined that there are certain things that should always be sacred. The well-being of our children is number one. With our differing opinions, we need robust conversation, education on why and how we got here, awareness of the consequences of those decisions. We can't be afraid of these conversations because the lives of children are at stake. I have tried to understand why we are allowing a statute to exist in our state that is, if not unconstitutional, as you heard today, may just be unfathomable if it puts any child in danger. We all own this. These kids can't speak for themselves. Now, I am a person of faith, and I believe wholeheartedly in prayer for guidance, for healing, and well-being. I enjoy the freedoms in this country to believe as I choose, as you do. For me, the Bible says that faith, hope, and love abide, and the greatest of these is love. With that knowledge and direction, I must stand up for the children of our state and ask us all to consider removing the language in our law that does not reflect the quality of that love that we have for our children. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.
With us on Zoom, Boise native Linda Martin was born into the Followers of Christ Church. Her ancestors, she says, were among the founders of the sect. She left the church at the age of 16, still has family members who belong to the church, and she is joining us via Zoom to share her story that some of you may have seen portions of on a 2018 documentary that A&E did called The No Greater Law. Linda Martin, can you hear me? You're muted right now, Linda.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thanks for joining us, Linda. You have the floor and the screen. Oh, it's a video.
Yes.
Okay.
So I would just start.
I thought she was live.
Hello, I am Linda Martin. I was born and raised in the Idaho Followers of Christ. I am a survivor of the Followers of Christ. When I was 16, I left my family and the Followers to escape the abuse. I was born in Boise and lived in Idaho for over 45 years. In 2013, I was part of a news report about Idaho's religious shield laws and the faith-healing deaths of children in the Followers of Christ. Since 2013, I have been asking the people of Idaho and the Idaho legislature to repeal or amend the religious shield laws to protect the children. The children who died were deprived of any form of medical care. Many of these children could have survived had they received basic medical care. I know of adults who made the choice to treat their children with prayer alone, watched as their children died, And then when facing their own illness or injuries, they went after medical treatment for themselves. Why is Idaho still protecting these parents? Prayer alone is not medical care. It is child abuse and neglect. For over 60 years, I have watched helplessly as my childhood friends, children in my immediate family, and children of church members die painful and needless deaths. Will there be another 60 to 100 years of death, disability, and pain for children born into Idaho's faith-healing families? Every year, Idaho's religious shield laws remain in the books. More children are at risk of dying. There are already over 200 children buried in Canyon County's Peaceful Valley Cemetery alone. How many would be alive today had they received medical care? How many more deaths will it take? 2022 is going into the 9th year. I have been asking the Idaho legislature to appeal or amend the religious shield laws to give all children the same protection under the law. I am asking Idaho citizens now to contact your lawmakers and ask them to amend or repeal these laws to save the children. All children have the right to life after birth. Let's make this the year that we change these laws and save children from dying. Thank you.
Also with us today is Canyon County Sheriff Kieran Donahue, who has had a long history with Followers of Christ members in his community in Canyon County. He too was prominently featured in that A&E documentary, No Greater Law, on the subject focused in his jurisdiction. Sheriff?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, fellow panelists, for being here. It can be a very emotional discussion, what we're having and the subject matter. From a practical perspective, that's what I'll try to speak to today from a law enforcement perspective, what I'm faced with under the mandates of my office and public safety. And first and foremost, I too am a person of faith. I have my religious beliefs, and I hope all people have a religious belief, whatever that may be. So this isn't about my religion against their religion or your religion. That should be set aside. And actually, Patricia, you did a good job of saying, it's about the children, and it is about the children. From the law enforcement perspective, and of course, we're not at the level that Jim Jones, of course, at the judiciary side. But when I get a call, just a basic call, or my office gets a basic call on neglect of children or an injury to a child or an abuse of a child, we are obligated, and rightfully so, mandated to investigate. And we're happy to do so and let the facts speak for themselves. The problem is when we get a call, if we get a call over the years on these types of cases, and I will clarify that our relationship with the folks from the Followers of Christ has improved, in my opinion, over the last 5 or 6 years. When we do get a call, it's very difficult. Let's just, for an example, Mark, I'll give you an example of a child, an infant that has died maybe at birth or maybe has died within a week or two and this is just an example. But for us, and it doesn't matter the age of the person that has died, that is a scene that we are obligated to investigate. And so we want to make sure that we protect not only the victim, if there is a victim, there's obviously a death, but we want to protect those who are associated with that victim as well, because they have rights. And my job is to protect those rights. However, what we've seen over the years is, and it's a patchwork of cases, because of their religious beliefs, the body may have been moved, the body may have been unclothed and reclothed. So for us, the scene has been altered. And so it's difficult from a law enforcement perspective that to do our job, we need to have all the facts of the case. And there are times when it's difficult for us to get people to come forward to explain what happened. We're not there to be judge and jury. We're there to gather the facts and review, and then, if necessary, produce a report and submit that report to the prosecutor for review. A lot of these cases that we see, that becomes very difficult from our perspective. Now, conversely, if we were to go to a person's house called upon by health and welfare or a witness that says, I think there's been abuse, or maybe law enforcement was called to a scene and saw that a child perhaps was in imminent danger, and they declare that child in imminent danger. That means health and welfare, by statute, is going to be involved in our society. That's a case where we, too, have to take a report, investigate the allegations, investigate the scene, and then submit our findings, quite frankly, to someone else, the other branch of government, not what we do. So for us, and I think Justice Jones talks about that a lot, is that the uniformity and the equality under the law, it should be equal across the board. We should not treat one group of people differently than we treat this group of people or this larger group of people. It should be uniform across the board. That's how, under the rule of law, if the society that we live in, that we choose to live in, we have the rule of law. And so, in my opinion, my professional opinion, that we all must follow under the same guidelines. And this, as Justice Jones has explained, creates a caveat that we don't do that. And so there is a protection for a specific class of individuals. And again, it's not about the religion that they adhere to or how they practice that religion, but when it comes to the child or the children who, at 18 years of age in this state, we can make decisions for ourselves. A 2-year-old can't make that decision. A 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have an obligation as a society, in my opinion, to make sure that those children are protected as well. And so it becomes very difficult for law enforcement to approach this equally across the board when it's not equal. The statute, this exemption, creates it as a non-equal. It's somewhat discriminatory, right? And you can take that as a negative or you can take it as a positive, depending on the group of people that you're representing. And so it makes it very difficult for us we want what's best for the child. We want what's best for the family. We want what's best for society. And so to do our job, I believe, I should say, that the statute should be uniform across the board. No one should have a greater advantage or a lesser advantage than the other. And so I think that, for me, sums it up. And to Jim's point about diagnostic care, we're not talking about, as you pointed out, Mark, which I appreciate, we're not talking about whether you're pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine or even masks, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about if there's medical attention is needed for the child, that medical attention should be sought out to save the child's life or treat the child, as it is for the rest of our society. And so, but in this case, it's not. And so that's where we have a disenfranchised situation for all of us. So I think that's where I will leave it for now. But it's about, and as Jim, he's the scholar, I am not, about whether it's constitutional or unconstitutional. But I think that's something that lawmakers should take into account, his advanced experience and knowledge on this subject matter. And again, I think as a society, and I think, Patricia, you point that out, we should all take the responsibility to care for all of our society, not just part of our society. So thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. And for those of you that are interested in this subject, and obviously you wouldn't be here if you weren't, you should check out that documentary, No Greater Law. It really goes in depth on this topic. A recent study from 2 Boise State professors revealed a child whose parents are members of the Followers of Christ Church is 4 times more likely to die before the age of 1 than any other child. Here on the video is what else they found.
Hi all, my name is the scope of the now the method. Now here are the results. The results are Hi all, my name is Guido Giuntini, Economics Department at Boise State University, and I'm here to talk to you about a study conducted with my colleague Carissa Wolf, also of Boise State University, on the Sociology Department. And what we looked at the effects on child mortality of religious exemption laws. And to do that, we specifically look at the example of the followers of Christ in Idaho. The scope of this study is, in fact, what I mentioned, is to identify an empirical way to measure what the effects are on child mortality of the practice of refusing medical care or delaying medical care for religious or personal beliefs. There have been some studies already done in that, but more on the qualitative side. For example, Cardiff, I look at specific cases, and our study tries to circumvent the problem of underreporting, which is always a problem, the difficulty in accessing data and information, which is also mentioned by Cardiff, and other legal obstacles, for example, the legislation that is here present in Idaho. Now, the methodology, we need to talk about how we did this study. The way we did this is we took this data from the cemetery of Peaceful Valley, which is in Canyon County, where the majority of the members of the community are buried, and we compared that with a random sample of another cemetery close by. We decided to take Dry Creek Cemetery in Boise. The reason for that is that there is a big data set available online of their grave sites, so we could compare the two. And so we looked at, to avoid other problems that deal, for example, with the fact there are few graves of older times, we looked at people that are buried in those two cemeteries that were born after 1950. So people dead at the end of 2019 when we took the information, they were born after 1950. And we corroborated this data with interviews with some former members. Now, here are the results. The results are startling, and you need to see the difference between the two. The average age, if you add up all the ages of all the people buried in the two cemeteries, divided by the number of graves of people born after 1950, you will see the average age is 19.6 for Peaceful Valley and 26 years for Dry Creek. The difference is almost 6.5 years. That's pretty startling difference. The median, though, is where you can really see the difference. The median, meaning half the graves present in Peaceful Valley are of people 9 or younger. In Dry Creek is 25 or younger. So here, a huge difference. And you can see the number of observations. Of course, Peaceful Valley is a much smaller cemetery, so we used 255 graves there versus 1,485 in our sample from Dry Creek Cemetery. But the difference is pretty obvious. So to go more into the child aspect of the problem, here we decided to look at specific ages. So we looked at the graves of kids that were age 1 when they died, age 1 to 3, and 1 to 9. And we look at the percentage of all the graves that we counted whose people buried had the specific ages. So you can see that in Peaceful Valley, just 9% of the graves have kids that are 1 year of age. In Dry Creek, that's 2.3%. The ratio is about almost 4 times, 3.8. And then when you consider older ages, 1 to 3 and 1 to 9, the difference decreases, the ratio decreases, but it's still pretty startling. For the age 1 to 9, it's 1.8 times, so almost double the amount of graves are of children 1 to 9 in Peaceful Valley than in the Dry Creek Cemetery. Now here, another way to look at the results is if you take all the individuals and you pretend they're all born at the same time, and then you count the number of graves by each age group, you can see what percentage of the individuals that were born are still alive at a certain age. So for example, initial, of course, is 100%, and you can see that about half the kids, half of the graves in Peaceful Valley, the orange line, contain people that died between the age of 0 and 4, or before the age of 5, while about 30% of the graves in Peaceful Valley, in Dry Creek contain kids that have died between the age of 0 and 4. Notice what we are measuring here is not life expectancy, because life expectancy will have to consider also people that are still alive, they're born after 1950, so we only consider deceased people in the two cemeteries born after 1950. But you can see how, of course, by the age of 69, 70, here everybody would be dead because if we are considering people that are already deceased, so it has to be 100% in total. But of course, the difference between the two lines diminishes as the ages go on. But the startling difference at the beginning in the different age of children. Now, we need to consider a couple of things regarding validity of what we saw here, and the main has to do with stillbirths versus infant death. Of course, stillbirths are not a main issue currently, but it's still a problem when you look at the graves of infants that they have a specific date. So you can see here the picture, for example, of this girl here, which was born in February 18, 2008. And it's hard to know if this was a stillbirth or a infant death because you don't have access to the death certificate. You have no way to tell that. Or, for example, if you look at the picture below here, there's no date at all. So, for example, we didn't count this in our methodology because there's no way to tell if this is a grave of a stillbirth or an infant death or how old was the child when it died. So, the conclusion of our study is pretty stark. There are very statistically significant differences in the average rate of death, and the main difference is in infant and child mortality. The rates are what causes the big difference in the average rate of death between the two cemeteries. If you go on with the study, you will see that adults have similar mortality rates between the two populations, and there are different possible explanations of why that is the case, but that is not the scope of this explanation here. In our study, we also compared other religiously isolated groups. Specifically, we looked at the Amish in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and the difference is not as stark. Actually, child mortality is about the same for the Amish population as for the population that lives around them, because they do not refuse medical care, but they actually seek medical care and have a very healthy lifestyle. Of course, this is just a beginning study, so there's need for further research. The small sample size of the Peaceful Valley Cemetery didn't allow us to look, for example, a difference in gender or other kind of differences we could be looked at for further studies. In any case, this was our attempt to measure this difference in child mortality and really give it a quantitative aspect. We had some qualitative analysis, some interviews to support some of the choices that we made. And of course, if you have any questions, we are always available to answer them. If you want a copy of the paper that we wrote, please email to one of us and we'll be happy to send it to you. And thank you very much for your time and for your attention.
Also with us today via Zoom, John Foote. He is the former prosecuting attorney in Clackamas County outside of Portland, also a fellow recent retiree. John's most famous cases in his many years as prosecutor involved prosecuting members of the Followers of Christ Church after the deaths of several children. And John, we appreciate you joining us. You have the floor and the screen. John Foote.
Thank you, Mark. It's an honor to be here with all of you. I am retired, happily so, but this is an issue that we had a great deal of experience with in our county. I became the district attorney in 1995. I had never had any interaction with faith healing or with the Followers of Christ. I was just a traditional prosecutor. But when I came to the office, I discovered that this problem existed. I heard from medical professionals, and so I decided, see, in Oregon, there is no exemption for faith healing in terms of taking care of children. It's not in the statute. So we didn't have that problem. What we had was a practice that had not been addressed in decades. In effect, there was no prohibition against faith healing and the death of a child. So we didn't have to change the law. We just had to change what was going on. So I thought we should warn the church that that wasn't going to be the way it was going to be done anymore. So I had people go out and meet with the church leaders and tell them, you need to know if you let your kids die from preventable illnesses intentionally, you will be subject to a criminal investigation and potential prosecution. So we did that. And then we didn't have any deaths for a while that we knew of. We rely on the medical examiner's office to tell us, because they had a working relationship with the church, and they were the people they called. And then it started, and we, over about 6 or 8 years, we had 6 criminal cases, 5 of them involving the death of a child. Almost all except for one was an infant. One was a 14-year-old, and one was not a death. But and we had convictions in every case, but no one in my office or myself had ever had any experience with a case like that, because these were, for all appearances, law-abiding people, not the usual people we see in criminal cases usually. And they seemed to be very sincere. So we started out being very determined to honor their faith. I was a religion major in college. My sister is a retired minister in Minnesota. My mother, before she passed away, was a retired minister back east. My grandparents were missionaries overseas. I was raised in a church. I don't think faith healing and medicine contradict each other, but not one to the exclusion of another. So in any case, but when we started the cases, we discovered something that we had never anticipated. You know, when a child's going to die in the church, everyone goes to the house to pray. That was the practice. I assume that's the practice generally. They have a number of religious things they do. They know the child is dying. And after the child dies, they call medical examiner's office, and medical examiner's office calls law enforcement. You go to the house, there are 100 people standing around. Everyone says there were no symptoms. That happened in every single case. And they all seemed sincere. Until we did the autopsy and brought in medical professionals to say, there is no way this would have happened with no symptoms. No way. And the first time we got caught by surprise, but not after that. We anticipated that they would lie, because that's what they were doing. They were lying. And that shocked us, because they're people of faith. So looking back, what did we learn? First of all, these cases are far more tragic than statistics, because they are completely preventable. The doctors told us that within a minute before that child died, if a doctor had taken control of that child would have lived. They told us that the things they saw the children dying from, they had not seen in decades, because they just didn't happen anymore anywhere else. They were shocked. It seems so unnecessary as a person of faith. And we had some other impressions. There was tremendous internal pressure within the church. You were basically excommunicated if you went to a doctor, not only from the church, but from your family. We talked to family members who still lived in Oregon City, where the church was, who hadn't talked to their family in decades. It was heartbreaking. That makes people be quiet. But we also discovered through backdoor communication during all those cases, there were many people in the church who wanted this to stop. They wanted to take their kids to doctors, but they couldn't say it. And they begged us to keep prosecuting. The other thing we discovered is when we would go in and do a search warrant of the house where it happened, we would find out that the parents sought medical care on many occasions, but not their kids. And they would seek medical care for their pets, not their kids. You can tell this was shocking to us, because they professed such sincerity about it, but it just did not add up. But they didn't stop. There were breaks in between, but we kept going, and we communicated to them, we are not going to stop until you stop letting kids die. So The other thing that appeared to me was, and this is just me speaking, that there was more of an effort to appear virtuous to God than there was to help your kids. That you would sacrifice your children to prove your faith. Think about that. The God I believe in does not ask people to do that. That seems wrong. Well, it is wrong. Faith healing is fine. I have no problem with faith healing. But prohibiting medicine can be a crime. And under most laws in this country, it is. And when we start prosecuting these cases, the Christian Science folks came to see me. That's a very large church. And they do faith healing. And we had long talks in my office. And I told them, look, you can do faith healing. I believe in miracles. But you can't neglect kids by not giving them medical care. And they actually said they agreed with me. And they backed off and stayed out of the cases. It's tricky because of the people involved, the anguish and the despair. So you have to be clear-headed about what comes first. And what comes first are kids. Thank you. It's an honor to speak here, and I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody has.
Thank you, John. Also with us via Zoom is longtime Idaho State Representative John Gannon, who was actually the one who drafted the bill in 2018 that would have made faith healing a criminal offense in the state, as it is in nearly every state in the country. That bill did not make it very far down the road. Representative John Gannon on Zoom.
Well, thanks, Mark. And just to correct what you said there, it was not making faith healing a crime. It was basically you have to combine your faith healing with medical care, with medical consultation. But Idaho Code 18401, I think, really illustrates the problem. And I think I'd ask that that there be copies for the audience, and I don't know if there are there, but I'd encourage you, those in the audience and on the panel, to pull up Idaho Code 18-401, and what it deals with is the abandonment or non-support of wife or children, desertion, and non-support of children or spouse. This statute illustrates the issue and the problem that I think the panel's been focusing on. If you look at subsection 2, it deals with the child, and it requires that the parent furnish necessary food, clothing, shelter, or medical attendance for his or her child or children. But it has an exception that if faith healing alone is used, that's not to be construed as a violation of the duty of care to the child. Okay. But in subsection 3, it talks about supporting the spouse. And if the spouse is not supported by the other spouse, if one spouse willfully abandons and leaves the spouse in a destitute condition, or who refuses or neglects to provide such spouse with necessary food, clothing, shelter, or medical attendance, then there can be liability under this criminal liability under the statute. So the question immediately arises: well, why isn't there a faith healing defense for the adult spouse? Why is it just applicable to the children. And I think that focuses in on the whole issue that is being discussed today. Shouldn't the children receive the same kind of care that you would be expected to give to your spouse? If your spouse was seriously ill and needed to have some kind of care in order to possibly alleviate that illness, this statute requires that the other spouse do that. You're required by law to do that, but you're not required by law to the same extent for treating your child. And so I think that's something to really ponder, to think about. Is that really what we want as a society, as Idahoans, as people, as citizens? Is that really the ideal way to go? And I think not. And so I would hope that this statute can be amended by this legislature or in the very near future.
Thanks, John. Okay, it is 4:25 and we have 35 minutes before we need to leave. And I would like to open up this panel discussion to talk about some of the questions that members of the audience have submitted. And going through many of them, for obvious reasons, are asking the panelists about parents' rights and the rights that parents have in raising their children. This question: what do you think gives you the right to decide if faith healing should not be used to treat a child that chooses it and their family chooses it, including vaccines? Kind of along the same lines, how do you reconcile the Supreme Court rule in 2000 that states the custody, care, and nurture of the child resides first in the parents, with this proposition to take parental rights away from good parents, dealing with parental rights? Anyone want to just chime in, and we'll just open it up to the panel for discussion.
Certainly. I think that question has partially been answered by the panelists actually today, when we talk about, and John John Foote, the prosecutor, talked about not mistaking the faith with the law. And for me, at least, it goes back to the uniformity and the equality under the law. It's not about trying to impose criminal penalties because you have a particular faith, but to rather recognize that we live in a society of laws and that we, outside of this exemption, we impose those laws, or we hold people accountable, we investigate those cases for neglect and the well-being of those individuals, whether it's a child or whether it's an adult. And for here, more specifically to the child. And so how do we ignore that? For me, it's hard to try to find a way to ignore for this parent versus that parent. When this parent says, well, and we can say parental right. Most of us here are parents. We want to raise our children the way we want to raise our children, but we also live under the rule of law in a society that reflects that. And so if we carve out that your child can perish because of not addressing a basic medical need, but this person over here who doesn't claim that religious status, we're going to hold them accountable under criminal investigation, it's just not fair. And to me, the law should be fair to everyone. It should be, again, equal across the board. There should be uniformity. And so, Mark, that would be my first take on it. Without digging deeper, this is complex. I don't think there's anyone in this room or watching this video that thinks it's not complex. It is complex, and and I appreciate both what Representative Gannon and John Foote had to say. These are good people who are well intended. They are parents, and they care deeply about their children and their family. I have obviously talked to many over the years as an investigator and as the sheriff, and that's not an issue at all. But for me, it goes back to we can't. What's good for one must be good for all, rather than what it is today. But that would just be my comments.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely.
It's just a matter of principle. The rights of a parent are not unchecked in any arena. I mean, we don't live in that kind of world. And, you know, there are places in the world where they let parents do whatever they want to kids. But in this country, we have never done that, as evidenced by the discussion about the laws that were in place when I was created as a state. The question is, what are you trying to balance? And, you know, I don't think that's the issue. It's not about parents' rights. It's about the balance. And I don't think you need to stop faith healing, but you have to protect your kids from preventable things, and that medicine can address, medicine that is available, medicine that is applied in almost every other case. And we haven't had we didn't have one real controversial case about the fact that the death was preventable. And the medicine that could have done it was immediately available. So this is not as stark as it looks. Now, I believe, from my experience in Oregon with the followers, that the pressures within the church are the huge obstacles, because we had the laws there, but the practices persisted, and the pressures on the parents persisted. And, you know, that's not a healthy thing either. So, in my opinion, but of course, we've seen tragedies in other arenas with that. But, you know, there's a way to balance this. And for me, it's not complicated. Just eliminate that provision in the law, and you have the right laws in place. And then the complicated thing is, how do you investigate them in a way that you can do something if something needs to be done? That is complicated. Just changing the law doesn't change your ability to get at what happened. And you're dealing with such a powerful force from within the church. I felt they had to feel a powerful force from our office that we weren't going to back down on this. So, and so we tried to make every case thoughtful, based on the medicine, and based on the facts. And I believe we have tipped it in that church. We will see. But it was very, very difficult. That's what I would say.
Okay. Thank you, John. And those comments dovetail nicely into these two questions that have to do with the specifics of this proposed bill that Representative Gannon is hoping to introduce at some point. And so, John Gannon, this would be for you. And the concern here is, how can you guarantee that this will not set a precedence for going after parents who choose not to give their children a COVID shot, a flu shot, any other vaccinations? How do you guarantee that this won't be a precedent setter? Can you? And also along those lines, who determines what medical care or medical attention really means? Who determines medical professional as well? So Representative Gannon, we'll throw it to you.
Thank you, Mark. First of all, the vaccination statutes, and there are several that preserve the right to refuse or decline vaccinations in a number of different circumstances. I mean, those stay intact. So any change in 18401, for example, would not affect the applicability of the vaccination statutes. Now, I think in addition, I'd be more than willing to put in a sentence in there saying that this has nothing to do with vaccination, and vaccination is not a basis for vaccination is not included in the definition of medical attendance. It's just there's no reason to get into that, and I don't think a lot of the circumstances that we've seen or discussed even approach the vaccination. As to what happens in the future, no, there's no guarantees of anything unless, even if you have something in the Constitution, it can be repealed or revised through there is a method of changing our Idaho Constitution, and there's a method of changing the United States Constitution for that matter. So there's no, I don't think anybody can guarantee anything, but certainly we could put in place a provision that vaccination is not considered to be medical attendance. I think that would be easy to do, something I'm more than willing to do, and move on. The second part of that question, Mark, was?
Second part of that question was.
Make sure I answered the whole thing.
I think you did.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
There is some concern in this room, and it was the same concern that former Senator Sheree Buckner Webb raised when she voted against this bill in 2018. How will you prevent this law from being used to abuse other religious freedoms for other parental groups? Former Senator Webb said that because we have a melting pot of religions in the state of Idaho, her concern was the bleed over to other religions and being able to use that in other ways. How is that preventable, and will this do that?
Can I speak to that for a second?
Absolutely.
Well, I live in a state in which we don't have those protections. So if this sort of thing was going to happen, you might think it might happen in Oregon. And it has not. But that doesn't mean that somebody might not do something that's inappropriate. I mean, most of the interaction between government and families does not involve criminal law. It involves social services and, that sort of thing, schools. And that's an active dynamic involving who those people are, what kind of judgment do they have. And those are things in which citizens are actively involved in advocating for what they want, or what they believe. And I don't think anything about that changes that. So, you can talk on hypotheticals. In truth, if you eliminate this, you stop taking one religion and treating them different than all the other religions. So, in effect, it's fairer, although that's not my first concern. My first concern are the kids, and the parents who are subjected to this really awful choice between their kids and their connection to their family and their community, which they know are at risk if they take their kid to a doctor. So that's my focus, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Mark, thank you, John. That rings a bell too with the bleed over into other religions. And then John just spoke about what Oregon does or does not do. If I recall correctly, and someone may correct me, Melinda or Roger, we are one of only 6 states in the union that have not removed this exemption. So other states have seen through to do that. And so since the 70s that Justice Jones talked about. And I deeply respect prior Senator Cherie Buckner Webb. She's a friend of mine. And we've had numerous talks, not specific to this issue, but it does raise a question from a conversely standpoint. What it would, as she points out, what would it do for other religions? But there's another side to that coin, and the potential abuse of under the guise of religion, right? Quote, the guise of religion, that person X wants to say, well, it's my religion to use fentanyl or methamphetamine to treat my child's ailments. That's my, quote, religion. That's a really extreme example, but I can tell you that people are not above it in our society. And so, or that we're going to treat young women as, in some religions, far different than we treat young women, and marriages and so on and so forth, or condemnation from having relations with men or boys. That side of the coin can be strongly abused as well under the guise of religion. So, as has been pointed out, there's a balancing act here, and we must find the balance. So, certainly respect Cherie and appreciate her comments, but it would be we have to look at the whole picture, not a piece of the picture. Thank you.
This is interesting. A comment here from a participant, an audience member. Since Western medicine has tended to disregard and even at times punish those who practice, use, or are prescribed natural medicines, who exactly would be considered the authority to decide what medicine or what medical care would be most helpful or necessary should this statute be overturned?
If I could, Mark, again, in Oregon, that just doesn't come up. The only reason we ever get involved is when a child dies or a medical authority see a child and know or a school sees a child and is concerned for them. But if that happens and the child hasn't died yet, then there's a conversation with the family about what are the options, what would work best. The effort would be to help the child, not to get the parents. And I'll be honest, I've never seen one of those kind of cases where we're trying to get the parents. No, we're trying to help the children. And we want to educate the parents on what the choices are. So that's what I would say to them.
John Gannon, for you, who, when you drafted this bill, did you envision as the, lack of a better word, gatekeeper? You're muted, John.
That would be gatekeeper for medical attention.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I think we have situations now where there are multiple consultations. There are consultations with different physicians, and that's in cases where I think it comes up in for example, in cancer treatments, in very serious treatments. There is a process where the different options are reviewed. Parents are definitely involved in that, and then decisions are made. And I think unless the decision is well, let me just put it this way: there are standards that are applied right now for those decisions to be made, and I think there's a lot of deference to what the parents want to do.
Sheriff, let me ask you that. How do you hear about who sends the call in?
Thank you, Mark. Well, it can be a number of different ways. It could be the coroner, the medical examiner in a case where there's a death. It could be a family member. It could be the family themselves that, as I say, I've
But
seen.
it's normally after the death.
True. It's more narrow or more rare where a child is sick over a period of time and we get a call. We've had those cases. We've investigated those cases, but lack of prosecution because of the exemption. But normally it's after. And so we could get that call from anyone, just like throughout the rest of society, we could get a call from a school teacher, a nurse, anyone that says, I have concerns that this is happening. We're obligated to investigate that, right, to the best of our ability, and we're glad to do so because our job is to keep the peace and protect all people, right? So it's it can come from anywhere. But as John points out, John Foote, it's more difficult in cases when people are not as cooperative, if you will, because they feel that they're protected from that. And I think I will add to what Representative Gannon was just saying. When we asked the question that was asked Mr. Gannon about who makes that decision, I don't think it's any different than who makes the decision when you take out just the faith healer aspect, whether it's the followers or any other religion that practices this solely, faith healing. Let's just say the other percentage of society, medical examination by doctors that we trust, that society trusts through their accredited and legal certifications, they make that decision as, you know, with the prosecutor, with the family, with so on and so forth. So I don't see that changing. I think that's already in place. It is for the rest of society. Right. And maybe Oregon saw it differently, but that's would be my take. I don't think you're going to create a special class of doctor. They already exist. They already do all these cases, medical examiners, pathologists, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add to what the sheriff said?
Absolutely.
Typically what would happen is if there was a concern and the child was alive, but there was concern from a school or somebody, social services gets called. This is what typically happens. And they go out and they talk to the family and they look at the child. And if they have concerns, they will ask for a hearing in front of a judge, an independent judge, to say, we're concerned about the safety and welfare of this child. It could be that the parents are using lots of drugs in the house and it's unsafe for the kids, or it could be a medical issue, or it could be anything. And the judge makes the calls, and it's not a criminal case. The judge might decide to put, it's called a dependency case in Oregon. I don't know what you call it in Idaho. But then the judge makes the decisions about how to proceed from there with a point of view to protect the child. The parents would be allowed to be heard and express their opinions. The social service people could bring in a doctor to say, well, this is what we think or whatever. We had a case like this with a mom who wouldn't provide medical care to her child who had cancer. It wasn't faith-based. And the court got involved. It wasn't a criminal case. The court got involved. And there were hearings and people had a chance to say what they wanted. And then the judge made a decision. So that's how it can happen if there's not a death. And nobody wants to make it a criminal case unless they have to. And in our case, we had to, because kids were dying. A lot of kids were dying for no good reason.
And Mark, and thank you, John. That does bring up a good point. And I'm remiss in saying that for Idaho, that's an excellent point. It's not necessarily a criminal case. Numerous law enforcement calls of service throughout the state. If there's a report of an imminent danger or concern, and officers respond, one of our first calls is to the Department of Health and Welfare, which is not the criminal side, but the civil side, right? Mm-hmm. And to help that family or that individual. There may be no action taken, or there may be action taken where the child or children are taken into protective custody by the state, not by law enforcement, but by the state. and then a safety plan or a plan of action put into effect, and all parties move forward, right? So without prosecution. But a judge may order that as well, like John said. In the state of Idaho, it's the same way.
Right.
So I think that is a very good clarification.
Well, along those lines, as we mentioned, Patricia, your nonprofit, like Faces of Hope, and there are others that are in place to provide a safety net for families that are struggling, for family members that frankly are concerned about what's going on under the roof of their house. And that's why you have your program. That's one of the things you guys do, is that right?
Yes, Mark, thank you. And I've been listening to this from a legal standpoint, from trying to see how it all, a legislative standpoint, from a perspective of family consciousness, as you've talked about in my foundation. The whole reason it's called that is because I want us to be more conscious of family, not just say there's a family and they have responsibility. What does that really mean within that family also? So being someone who grew up in a family where I understand trauma, and I understand what trauma can mean to you later on in life. I understand that without the some help from the community, support of the community, not the community telling you what to do, but them supporting you, the family gets to make that choice. So you take this away, so that there is no, what's the word I want now? The statute, so that isn't, you aren't protected by faith healing. Right. That goes away. You can still believe in faith healing, and I want you to, and pray for them. But you have to make that choice then of what happens to that child. Yes, it is you as the parent and the family's responsibility, but as a person in the community who can see it from a child's perspective too, we also have that responsibility. If we see a child in imminent danger, shouldn't we say something? And then then it goes into all the systems that you're talking about. I'm not saying taking that responsibility away from the parents. I'm saying you have that responsibility, and what are you going to do to save the life of the child? And so, this is where the complications of the policy, and it's the long game. And I want to make sure no child dies now, right now. And it isn't, and it's also what we all have different experiences. We all have different, we come from it from different ways. But if we can continue these kind of conversations where we truly talk about it and try to understand it, I think we can get there. I want Idaho to be the best place to raise a family. I don't want to worry that a child will die because someone didn't pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Can I add something on a personal note on this?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, my 2-year-old nephew had spina bifida, and he died of untreated pneumonia when he was 2 years old. I called Health and Welfare and asked if there was some way that somebody could come in and help this child before he died. They told me because of the faith healing statute, the parents were not doing anything wrong, and so they could not intervene. That's one reason we need to get rid of this law. And I have talked to first responders that have gone out to accidents, and there's been an injured child, and the parents were there and have told them that they did not believe in medicine. And so they had to walk away and leave that child and could not put a child in an ambulance and take him to a hospital.
Can I add one thing to the answer? And that is, especially when you look at 18401, it seems to boil down to this: what's good for the parents, what's good for the spouses, should be good for the kids too. And that's we've had the term medical attendance applicable to the spouse for as long as this statute indicates, since at least 1972. So I don't think that is an issue that should be of big concern, because all we would be doing is saying what's good for the parents, it's good for the kids, and you'd have the same standard the same rules, same law.
I've saved this series of questions for the last, we've got about 6 minutes. And in that documentary, I believe it was Mr. Seavey said that he's a rancher in Idaho because of the freedoms that it offers with the ability to worship the way he wants. And it's the reason why the pilgrims came here in the first place, is so to escape the religious tyranny of their country. So the bottom line here is, and I've gotten this from a number of people, what gives the state the right to determine how I parent and how I live my life in this free Idaho? What gives the state the right to do this? I'll open that up for the panel.
I can answer that just a little bit. What gives the parent the right to choose a treatment for a child or non-treatment if that causes permanent disability or death? What right does a parent have to seek medical treatment for themselves and then deny their child the same treatment? What gives the parent the right to treat one child with insulin and let 3 other children die? Shouldn't this be equal for all children? You know, the parents do have the right to raise their children as they see fit, but every right has boundaries, and that boundary is crossed when in the exercise of religion, it causes permanent disability, death, or abuse to another person, especially a child. Thank you.
I have to go back to my experience in these cases and the experience in my office with the followers of Christ in Oregon. And I'll be honest with you, it just wasn't about the kids. It was about the parents proving how faithful they were to God's word. And the sacrifice of the child was the way they did that. Does that sound right to anybody? That's
exactly.
Not right. So,
no.
If I could, this is not new. What's changed is medicine has come so far in being able to prevent death in kids. And along with it has become this fiduciary responsibility of parents to do what's reasonable to help their kids survive. They came together. Do we want to go back to when neither one of those existed? So I don't think so. And this bleak picture of, I mean, it's easy to do because our country was formed in a rebellion against government. And they wanted religious freedom. But that's an extreme example for a specific circumstance. And I don't think they're inconsistent because our country has changed. Medicine has changed. And with it comes this duty of parents to do what's reasonable to protect your kids when it's available. I mean, if your child dies from something and you didn't know what the medicine was, or no one's prosecuting people for that. It's when people know and consciously choose to ignore what's going on and let their child die in front of them. That's the circumstance we're talking about. So, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. That, to the question, right?
Yeah.
And I'll paraphrase the question. What gives the state the right to dictate how a person raises their child? Mm-hmm. I think it's goes back for me to, we live in a society of laws. We choose to live in this state. We choose to live in this society of the United States, but specifically the state of Idaho. Our ancestors did flee Europe because of the oppression. But what we also chose to do in the republic that we live in is to discuss it, as Patricia has pointed out, and to petition the legislature, petition the courts even, all the way to the Supreme Court, to what laws we want to live by as a society. And I think that's paramount, that we have the freedom to petition this legislative body in this house that we're in today. And the majority rules, because we believe in our democratic republic.
Right.
And so we enact laws, we amend laws, we put laws in place. We may not all agree with the law. We may not. There's certainly laws that I don't agree with, from a personal standpoint or even professional, but I am obligated to enforce the law because that's what the people put forward is that law. And that's, to me, that sums up why the state has that ability, because the people speak to that. Not just one small group of people, but the majority of the people.
Okay. I believe you had a question. You weren't able to get up here. We've got about 2 minutes. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate your question. I appreciate that. We have time for 1 minute close. If anybody wants to close, would you, Patricia?
Well, I don't know if I can close, but what I keep thinking about is why is there only one faith that's protected? And so, I mean, to me, if this is the bigger conversation, why is there just this one faith that's protected and everyone else isn't both to the law thing? And I don't think it should be there. If it wasn't there, we'd all be back on a more equal basis. And it is complicated. I'm hearing you say all of it's complicated for us right now. But from my perspective, we have the power as citizens of this community to do the right thing to protect our children, and we should do that, even if it's just one step at a time. Let's keep doing it. Let's keep focused on that. But it isn't just one faith. It's all of us. And I that's what I can. It's because the federal government told us we had to, which doesn't sound like Idaho at all. They told us we had to do this, so we do it. Mm-hmm. That's not a reason.
All right. I want to thank the panelists for joining us today. Obviously, this is a topic. As a former member of the media, I can tell you that this is, again, as I said at the outset, not a new issue. It will be one that will continue to bubble underneath the floors of the State House, and it's one that I know that you have a lot of interest in, and so we'll continue this discussion. Thank you for being here today. We really appreciate you. Thank you.